This episode of Q Point Podcast is pre-recorded, produced and sponsored by Karina Quirk, broker at Next Home Experience.
Different views.
I know your story.
From different Q's.
Incredible job.
He's David Quirk.
You brought it up.
And she's Karina Quirk.
Imagine.
This is
Q Point.
Thank you for joining us for part 2 with Jason Joyce, Director of Advocacy at NEFSA.
Let's talk about groundfish. How's that industry?
There are hardly any groundfish boats and active permits east of Vinyl Haven. In fact, I don't think there are any active permits east of Vinyl Haven. I have one of the few permits, but I'm not active with it because they took all my days away, and you have to join a sector so you can get some quota or you can purchase that quota. The federal government has made it very, very complicated and expensive for small owner-operators to access groundfish, which is not fair and it's not right. And that whole process has been so screwed up by the federal government and the councils over the last 30 years, I'm sure with good intentions, but that does need to be addressed because as groundfish come back, which will impact the lobster resource, our coastal communities need to have access to those groundfish quotas and an ability for our day boats to go out and be able to make a living and sustain their communities and bring in good seafood there. So the finfish for not necessarily just our lobster boats, but a lot of our lobster boats. My dad fished his whole life, and I would say of 60 years of lobstering, intermixed with all of that was probably 30 or 40 years dealing with groundfish, off and on seasonally. For example, up in Stonington, man, there was a lot of groundfish boats up there, and I don't think there's anybody out of Stonington that groundfishes now. The permits were consolidated, purchased by larger corporations, and then all of the smaller players, the guys like me who still have permits, they took all of our quota and our days away, but that needs to be addressed. We do have a policy person on our NEFSA board, Bonnie Brady, who is attending these various council meetings with that, and I'm attending as well. But we really need to restore the access to groundfish for New England and for Maine fishermen.
Can you give me some examples of groundfish?
Codfish, haddock, hake, pollock, any sort of fish like that that doesn't spend a lot of time in the middle of the water column, on the top of the water column. They stay down near the bottom. So that's how they get the name groundfish. They hang around on the ocean floor. Obviously, they'll go up in the middle of the water column. But a lot of these fish, like codfish, tend to stay near structure and near the bottom. So that's why they call them groundfish.
Recently in the news, I saw that there's a lawsuit about tracking on lobster boats.
Yes. So back in 23, ASMFC said that they wanted Maine lobstermen to be tracked. And Department of Marine Resources implemented that request, and they purchased boxes that we put on our boat, and then we are basically tracked. And a friend of mine, Frank Thompson from Vinyl Haven, he and several other fishermen decided to bring a lawsuit to question its constitutionality. And it's kind of gone back and forth. There was, I think, a favorable ruling originally, and then 2 appeals that weren't favorable to his case, and it could have been left there, but he has decided to push it forward, and he is working with the Pacific Law Foundation, I believe they're called, and they have appealed to the Supreme Court. So we should hear in the next month or 2, I think, if the Supreme Court will hear that. And I hope they are, because it is a constitutional question, and it needs to be addressed. And I appreciate Frank for bringing that forward.
So after you joined us last time, you were headed to the Fishermen's Forum, and then I see you also went to Boston. Can you update us on any of those meetings?
Yes, at the Fishermen's Forum, I was at the NEFSA booth, and we had a couple of petitions there, and it was kind of a last-minute thing to try to get some feedback from the fishermen, because it's a great place to get feedback, because you just have such a high consolidation of fishermen coming by your booth. It's a good chance to check the pulse on where people feel on things. I kind of knew where the pulse is on this, but we wanted some numbers. So we had a petition, asked if the fishermen are in favor of ropeless. And we are concerned about the ropeless, as I explained to you guys before, because of the safety issue. And they had over 300 signatures over a couple of days in opposition to ropeless. And in fact, my son said there was one guy that looked at him, he says, "I'm testing it, but I'm opposed to it." Then we also had a petition asking fishermen if they supported us applying for a grant for equipment for lobster hatcheries. And that didn't have as many numbers in favor, but I don't think it was a lack of support. But where we were at the forum, it's a fairly busy area, and we only had 2 clipboards, and we asked for so much information there. It almost was an example of why people don't like filling out things, but some people would just see how long it would take to sign and fill in and give your signature and your address and what town you're from, that some people just passed by and didn't come back by. But I ended up taking those results to a meeting with the head of NOAA Fisheries, who was there with some representatives from the New England Fishery Management Council and one representative from the Atlantic States Marine Fishery Council, and expressed really in that hour-long meeting how much we opposed ropeless and how dangerous it is, and was able to share the story of one young man that came by our booth who's a distant relative of mine. His great-grandmother and my grandmother were sisters. He came by and he signed that petition. And I asked him, I said, you signed the petition on ropeless? He said, yeah, I signed it. And I said, do you know anybody who was hauled overboard that was pulled back by that end line and it saved their life? And he said, well, yeah. He said, that was me. He said, the day after I graduated from high school, I was going with Dad, and he had a friend with him on the boat as well. And he stepped around the bait box and stepped right in between the line, between the traps, and he got hauled overboard. And he would have died, but his dad pulled him back and saved his life. So that just strengthened my resolve to share with the powers that be from the federal government that were there how dangerous ropeless is, because if there was no end line on that trap, that young man would have died. It felt like we were making an impact and they were listening. I think in a lot of these cases, when a regulation comes down from the federal government, as much as we would like to think that they're all heartless, I don't think they necessarily care if we go out of business, but I don't think most of them want us to die. So as we shared these stories, there was a guy there that spoke who had been hauled overboard from Massachusetts on an offshore lobster boat, and they saved his life by pulling back on the end line. So it felt as though we were making an impact and we were maybe reaching them with our concern over safety. I hope that that was productive, but there are conversations still happening now from contacts I made within the course of that meeting.
I noticed that there was quite a few candidates that are running for governor there. Were you able to talk to them?
I'll listen to them, and I appreciate it. Having run for office myself as a representative in the coastal islands where I live, I understand that there was a good chance for the candidates to come and express themselves. But I didn't hear anything there that made me all of a sudden jump up and down, get real excited. I was able to speak with Angus King's son. He came by our booth at the end of the day on Saturday. We were wrapping things up. Nice guy, came by, introduced himself, and we had just come out of that federal meeting, and I gave him a copy of a letter that I had from a captain on Swan's Island who had lost a young man off his boat, saved his life by pulling that line back, and was able to talk with him for a little bit. And I gave him that letter, a 3-page letter from the young guy on the island, and I asked him if he would give it to his dad, and I'm pretty sure he did, because we did receive some feedback over concern over the danger of ropeless. So I appreciated his son handing that off to the senator, and then the senator reaching out to NEFSA.
He joined us on the podcast, and he also informed me that he used to work as a sternman in his youth, so he had fully respected the description of the danger. It was real to him because of that experience.
That's great. Thank you.
So what else are you focusing on?
Well, I went down to the Boston Seafood Show, which was huge, and there were some meetings that were held down there with the head of NOAA Fisheries again, and then also with the Small Business Association, and USDA was there. In regards to this bill that King and Murkowski introduced and Senator Collins is supporting, it's kind of interesting. There was this account that was established. It was an act, actually, back in the 50s. And it was called the Salston-Kennedy Act. And it established what is commonly known as the SK Fund. It's officially the Promote and Develop Fisheries Products account, into which 30% of all gross import duties on seafood is deposited. So all of these tariffs and things that come in on this foreign shrimp and all that stuff, that's a bunch of junk. There's a tariff that comes off of that. And according to the law, 30% of all of those import duties come in, and it's supposed to go into this S&K fund. It was designed to balance the seafood trade deficit and make U.S. fisheries competitive in the marketplace. And as the Trump administration implements tariffs, this account will grow even beyond its current levels. So I could see that amount of money going up. But according to the 2025 NOAA budget, the amount transferred from the Department of Agriculture into that SK fund in 2024 was $377 million and change. When you're talking in the millions, 363,000 is change, of which 344 million was transferred into NOAA's general account. In 2025, NOAA estimates that 377 million will be transferred into the Promote and Develop Fisheries account and plans to take 100% of the money for its general operations, leaving zero money for fisheries marketing and promotion as mandated by the Act. So there was an amendment back in 1983 that said a minimum of 60% of each year's USDA transferred to National Marine Fisheries Service must go to make direct industry assistance grants to develop the United States fisheries and to expand domestic and foreign markets for United States fisheries products. So if you think of it, all this money that comes in on these seafood tariffs that are imported was set aside. And there was an amendment back in 1983 to take a portion of that, roughly 2/3 of it, and use that to help market American seafood so that Americans would buy, obviously, locally caught seafood. And from everything that I've been able to research and NEFSA's been able to find out is that all goes to the general fund. It doesn't go towards marketing our seafood or helping the fishermen. That was something that I learned at the Boston Seafood Show in a meeting that was held by the Small Business Association and the USDA. So that is something that we have been talking about within NEFSA for a while. But to see it highlighted up on the screen, that right there is, I wouldn't say it's infuriating, but it doesn't make me feel very good to think that ever since 1983, a certain portion of those funds were supposed to go towards marketing our seafood, and that's just gone to the general operating fund. That's disgusting.
Where have we heard that before?
Well, the money has never been used as Congress directed, and the program has never been implemented. The 60% of funds directed specifically for marketing will be transferred from National Marine Fisheries Service, which does not have a marketing division. So from this amendment back in 1983, they never even created a division in which they could do marketing. But by law, they were supposed to do this. And it's very aggravating to think that not only are we importing 85 to 90% of our seafood that Americans are eating, but a portion of that market, which is basically taken away from your American fishermen, a portion of those tariffs are supposed to be going towards marketing our own seafood for the last 40 plus years, and they haven't even done anything with it. I'm hopeful that that can be addressed and changed.
Well, it'd be interesting to find out where all that money went.
It went to the general fund.
Have you talked to any of our representatives or senators about this?
I have spoken to Representative Golden, and he's aware of it, and he's on it, which I'm thankful for.
You are listening to Q Point Podcast. I'm Karina Quirk, co-hosting with my husband, David Quirk, and we are having a conversation with Jason Joyce, Director of Advocacy at NEFSA. What else is affecting the fishing industry here in Maine?
Well, commercial fishermen from here right straight down the eastern seaboard are having to pay more for the fuel now, which is unfortunate, but we're hopeful that is not going to be a long-term situation and that we're such small players in all of this. But I am hopeful that this short-term pain of the price of fuel will turn into a long-term benefit of maybe more stable Middle East and shipping and all of that issue. I'm just thankful that our country is self-sufficient in our fuel. Unfortunately, it is a world commodity, so as the price goes up elsewhere, it goes up for us. But I was relating to my son-in-law the other day because he was wondering my thoughts on it. And I said, well, I remember when I was a kid, there were on the news a lot of long fuel lines and limits on fuel. And I think we will see, where it's a worldwide commodity, we'll see prices go up, but we won't see that limit on how much fuel you can take for your vehicle. It's just there is a demand for it now because they've shut down that strait over there. But we're still producing a lot of fuel. But I tell you what, if our government in the last 40 years had built one more refinery instead of investing in trying to industrialize our coastal waterways with offshore wind and wasting that money, we'd have been much better off.
You must have ran into this before in 2022 when the prices were higher on diesel fuel.
Yes. Under Biden, they were over $5 for us. And back after the economic collapse in 2008 and 2009, we were over $5 as well. So that was under two former presidents. So it does go up and down. As I look at it, I'm not speaking for anybody on this, but just my own personal reflection. There are things that will happen in the world that affects this. And honestly, our fingers are crossed that things are going to work out and that the prices will come back down. But right now, that is quite an increase in expense. I'm thankful that it's not right during the middle of shutter fishing, because then there'd be a bigger demand on the fishermen as far as the amount of fuel that they use. And right now, not many fishermen have gear out because we're just coming off of a cold winter and the lobsters aren't moving. So a lot of guys are doing other things and still get the gear on the bank.
What about bait prices? Has that gone up too?
Oh, I don't know. I haven't bought any bait since December because I got my gear up around Christmas time. But I would guess a lot of our baits are imported from Canada, Iceland, and around the world. We get various baits. Our domestic bait would be herring, and some of the herring is imported from Canada. But herring and menhaden or pogies, that's our cheapest bait.
A lot of fishermen in the wintertime probably pull their boats like you do. What do you do on the off season?
I don't pull my boat. I leave it in the water just in case there's an emergency or something like that and we have to get somebody to the mainland. But a lot of guys do haul their boats out. Winter is a hard time of year to make a living on the water. The danger's increased. Your expenses are increased. It's hard, the wear and tear on the gear. You imagine as storms go by and you've got trawls out there. So those lobster traps are sitting there, 10, 12, 15, 20 trap trawls or more. They don't really budge. So your lines that go to the surface, as storms go by, high run tides are on, everything gets stretched out. Mother Nature gives that gear a beating. So I haven't fished winters since the winter of 2008 when the price of lobsters collapsed. That summer, we went from $5 a pound in August. And then over the weekend, come Monday morning, it was $2 a pound. So that winter was a rude awakening to how we're going to pay our bills. So I got my arborist license, and my cousin and I, we both get our gear up usually around Christmas and New Year's. And then we do tree work through the wintertime. A lot of fishermen are talented with carpentry, so they'll pick up jobs in the wintertime rather than go through the hardships of trying to fish in the wintertime. Now, some guys do it and do a great job at it, and I'll tell you what, they earn every penny because it's very rare that you will see the prices that are there right now. But if the prices are really high, that means they're not catching anything. So it all kind of evens up. But winter fishing is a hard racket to make a buck at.
So tell us about the upcoming season.
Most of the lobstering fleet targets shutter fishing. So that usually happens in southern Maine a little sooner than it happens in down east Maine because the water temperatures are a little warmer. But I would say most of the fleet will have their gear in the water by the 1st of July. And everybody will be hitting it pretty hard right until maybe around Halloween. Then most of the fleet will have their gear up by Christmas or New Year's. It all depends on what the price of lobsters is doing, what the weather's like. If the weather holds off and the catches are good and the price is good, guys will stick with it. But if they transition to other things, everything from running an oil truck to picking up a carpentry job or caretaking work, and most of the fleet will get their gear up and haul their boats out by Christmas or New Year. And that wintertime, they'll find other jobs to do.
Is there different lines, like a 3-mile line and a 12-mile line where people fish, or different areas that they can, or some people fish in the bay?
So you have your state license, which allows you to fish in state waters. And then if you have a federal permit, you can fish outside the 3-mile line. Then you have zone lines, which go east and west. So that kind of go off from the shoreline, almost due south. So you have 7 zones, which technically put a line in the water. Then you have an exemption line, which has to do with the whale rules, and you can fish floating tail warps inside of that exemption line. Outside of that line, you have to have sinking line. Then you have trawl lines, so you can fish pairs or triples inside of a certain line in some of the zones. And then as you progressively move offshore, then you can fish 5s or 12s or 15s or 20s. Yeah, there are plenty of lines in the ocean that have been drawn, and it can be very complicated. Just one of those added complexities of being a fisherman these days.
So does the Marine Patrol monitor the fishermen to make sure they're in the right zone or the right line?
To a certain extent. The Marine Patrol is a fairly small department, so there's a lot that is required of the men and women who go and patrol our waters. They have to do a lot. I think they do a good job, considering they're a small department, but they do a good job.
When you say start in July, it seems, though, in front of our cottage on Memorial Weekend, I swear we have a few traps.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, some guys will fish year-round. Some guys will fish in the spring. A lot of the old-timers, they try to figure out when the last big gale of wind is coming on, and then they'll try to set after that, because if you set in close to shore, rent's pretty high up in the rocks, and you'll lose your gear during storms. So a lot of fishermen will try to time their spring fishing around when they figure those big storms are over with, the tides are over with, because you don't want to go out there for a $10 a pound lobster and all of a sudden you lose your gear. And then you're starting out shadow fishing in the negative. So when I say fishing starts, usually everybody has the gear in the water by July, I'm referring to the molt, to the shed, to the shedder fishing, to the majority of the catch that comes in the state of Maine. We're targeting lobsters that are getting ready to molt. And that's when your catch will go from up until the molt starts. You're fishing on hard shell lobsters and you might catch 60 or 70 pound. And then when all of a sudden that molt catch starts, so the shedder fishing starts, and when those lobsters decide they want to trap, when their shell has gotten hard enough and they're ready to eat, you will go from getting 60 pounds or 50 pounds of hard shell in a day with 1 or 2 men on the boat to all of a sudden you'll get 400 or 500 pounds of new shells. So that's when the catch picks up. So that's when a lot of fishermen will try to time when they put their gear in the water and start fishing, because obviously you want to be best positioned so your profitability will be the highest. So you're trying to set your gear and spend the money on the bait and all of that for when the catch is going to start picking up.
Do you represent commercial clammers?
NEFSA does, yes. We attend meetings and speak out on their behalf on issues, mostly when they alert us, but we do have at least one member of our board that is an active clammer.
Tell us about the recreational license that's available.
With clams, I don't know that much about it other than I'm a town selectman and we have the same thing on Swan's Island like you would have in Deer Isle. But that changes with each municipality. Municipalities can control that as well as the state license that you can have. So like in our town on Swan's Island, you can come and get a recreational clamming license and you can go and get a half a bucket or something like that. But you can't sell it. You can only eat it. And then you also have to be careful because you have to be sure that the red tide isn't on or some sort of a biotoxin has initiated a closure. So we have a local shellfish warden who is our officer who we hire from Hancock County, and he patrols our flats as well, as I'm sure it is up in your area. If you don't have an officer doing it, then it would be somebody that the town either pays a stipend to or pays hourly to go out and monitor the flats to make sure that if any clams are being harvested and those flats are closed because of a biotoxin, that someone isn't going to get sick. But yes, you can do that. Then you have your commercial harvesters, and their license is a state license that they would get as well as a local license. And the local towns also generally have a limit. We have a limit, so many licenses that we'll sell locally before we allow an off-island or non-municipal landowner or resident, non-resident, that's what it would be. So we have a certain amount of resident licenses before we will sell a non-resident license. But that's all basically within each municipality. They have various rules and a structure, and it all depends on how many people go clamming as well.
Well, before we let you go, tell us about your oyster farming.
Well, my cousin and I sat in on a little class that the Island Institute did, and that should have been a good lesson in not listening to the Island Institute. Just joking, Island Institute, but they made it sound as though we could not afford not to raise oysters. It sounded like such a great thing. So we're in our 9th year now, and by starting to oyster farm, we have guaranteed ourselves a minimum wage job as long as we want to keep doing it. That is my opinion on oysters. It's a lot more work than it appeared, a lot more time invested to try to create a good oyster. You can go and take an oyster, put it in a surface bag, and not handle it, not tumble it, and try to sell it in the marketplace. But that results in a very flat oyster with not much of a cup. My cousin and I, we have an experimental lease, which we're waiting for a decision on our lease, in which we mimicked a method that was done that I witnessed on the West Coast. It's a natural tumbling system. So just to try to give you a general overview, an oyster from the time you buy the seed, if it's left in an environment where there's no tumbling or no rolling or anything like that, basically the oyster itself will grow very flat, just like a pancake. But if that is moved around in a commercial tumbler, which is like a round device that runs off of a belt, and you put your oysters in one end and you have it tipped at a certain angle and they kind of fall down to the other area into the end, it will chip the edges of that shell off, but by chipping the edges of that shell, it'll cause the oyster to build a deeper cup or get thicker, more round, as opposed to so flat. We have come up with every ball-faced contraption you can think of to try to make our oysters good, and I think they are very good. It's a lot of work, But in the end, if you have an oyster that has a nice deep cup and it has a good flavor, which ours do, then it has some high demand, but it's still, considering the work that goes into it and the time involved, and considering it takes us about 3 to 4 years to come up with a market size oyster because the water temperature is so cold, even though you have people telling you we're in the warming body of water in the world and it's the end of the world. No, the actuality is in the last 3 years, we are progressively getting colder in the Gulf of Maine. But anyways, where we are off of the coast a ways, we're 5 miles outside of Mount Desert Island, the water temperatures are cold and they don't get up very warm in the summer. So by the time we get in 3 or 4 years of raising these oysters, we lose probably 15% a year because of the cold, the winter loss, and then you have sea squirts that will develop in the bag so you could keep flipping the bags. There's a lot of work to it. So by the time it's all said and done, we've created for ourselves a minimum wage job, maybe a little bit less.
And you're only able to sell it directly to restaurants, is that right?
The way the current license is right now, we can sell to the general public off of our lease site or off of our LPA site, I think. But what we do is we sell to commercial dealers. And that's a process too, because if it's during Vibrio season, which is, I believe, somewhere around the 1st of June, maybe the middle of May until October, that's when the temperatures are getting a little bit warmer. So you could have various biotoxins or freshwater runoff that affects the whole state. Last year, a big thing was the biotoxin. So it's just like red tide. And from us east to the Canadian border, at one point, all of the oyster farms were shut down because of the biotoxins in the water. But we test weekly, sometimes twice a week through the state, through our shellfish warden, which is our Hancock County Sheriff deputy that's on the island. He coordinates with the state, gets them the samples. So we'll give them samples of oysters and stuff. And I don't know what there is about Swan's Island, but our biotoxin levels all stayed low. So we were safe to be able to sell. But there's an awful lot to it. As a lobster fisherman, you go and do some of these other things, you think, man, wasn't it nice to be able to go set that lobster trap and catch me a lobster, even though I got to buy bait for it, and all of the various things that you have to do along the coast to make a living. And just thinking back years ago, ground fishing with my dad and going shrimping with dad, taking guys scalloping, going for urchins. Every one of those industries have their pluses and each one has their drawbacks. Oysters is no different. It's a lot of work, but I'm glad people out there like them, and we do have them for sale if people want them.
So essentially, it's a hobby.
I wish I had a different hobby. It's a very poor hobby. We should have picked better.
Jason Joyce, Director of Advocacy at NEFSA. Thank you so much for joining us again. It's been a pleasure.
It's great visiting with you guys. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we'll probably see you on the water.
Sounds good.
You've been listening to Q Point.
Follow us at qpointpodcast.com or on your favorite streaming app.
This is where you can get the news from the people who make the news.
Make sure to join us next time.
We hope you tune in.
Q Point Podcast invites guests and candidates from all parties to join the conversation. The views, information, opinions, and comments expressed during this program do not necessarily represent those of the host, Q Point Podcast, associates, affiliates, and CQRE LLC.
Thanks for being a part of the conversation. The most important voices aren't always the loudest ones. They're the voices of everyday people, raising families, running businesses, serving their towns. That's who we want to hear from. Share your ideas with us online, and let's make sure those voices are never left out. Find us on Facebook or on X or at qpointpodcast.com. We look forward to hearing from you. Catch every episode at qpointpodcast.com or wherever you stream. Tune in and tell your friends.